everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the More Than a Number podcast. I'm Sam, I'm your host, and I am super excited to share with you today an interview that I did with my friend Jaclyn, who is a dietitian. And it's funny how we met because her husband is also a dietitian. So two RDs together in the same house. I love it. And her husband works at the hospital where I work. So I met him and, just in kind of chatting with him, I learned about his wife and found that we had some things in common. So we ended up doing a Zoom, getting to know each other. And she's come to my hospital group to give a talk and just really have so much in common with her. I love listening to her. She's super passionate about the areas of nutrition that she covers. So I'm just going to go ahead and read her bio and then we'll get into the interview. So Jaclyn Klauder is a registered dietitian nutritionist and certified eating disorder specialist with expertise in behavioral health nutrition. She specializes in the intersection of nutrition, mental health, substance use disorders, eating disorders, and the gut-brain connection, helping individuals build sustainable, balanced relationships with food while supporting both physical and emotional well-being. Jaclyn currently serves as a full-time dietitian at Caron Treatment Centers, where she provides nutrition care for individuals recovering from substance use disorders and co-occurring eating disorders. In addition to her work at Caron, Jaclyn owns a private nutrition counseling practice, Very Well Nutrition, where she works with adolescents and adults seeking support for eating disorders, disordered eating, emotional eating, and overall nutrition and wellness. She is passionate about helping clients move away from restrictive dieting and food rules while fostering long-term health through practical, compassionate, and science-backed nutrition guidance. When Jaclyn's not working, you can find her shark tooth hunting on the beach, reading a mystery book, and spending time with her husband and her English bulldog Scruggs. So just from that, you can already tell if you're a listener of my show that there's a lot to unpack there and a lot that we talk about here on the More Than a Number podcast. By the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, there were some technical difficulties, and the way that we are side by side is the only way that I was able to edit the video. So if you're wondering why it's staying like that the whole time, that's why. Bear with me. You'll have to watch us through, both of us, through the whole thing. So it is well worth it. It is such a good conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Jaclyn. Jaclyn, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, I am so excited about this.
Good. Yay. I kind of mentioned it in the beginning, but it's funny how we met that your hubby works at the hospital that I work for. So we kind of met through him, and I'm so glad that we connected because I think we have so much in common. And this is going to be such a great, rich conversation. So before we dive in, I have a question that I like to ask everyone when I remember, especially. But I love to hear all the different answers, and I like to ask my clients too because it, kind of helps me get a sense of obviously what their goals are and what they like. But when you hear the word healthy, what does that mean for you? Like if I could wave a magic wand and say, Jaclyn, you're healthy, like what is that ideal definition for you?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question because that word gets thrown around a lot.
Yes.
I typically define healthy as holistic and that there's different pillars of what makes something or someone healthy, right? And I think a lot of people focus on like the physical health. Like if I'm physically well, then I'm healthy. And I think um, something that I tell myself, something that I tell my clients is that, there's also your emotional health to consider, your mental health to consider, your spiritual health to consider. There's so many different pillars of health where, if I'm physically well, like all of my lab work looks great, my blood pressure is great, and all these things are great from a physical standpoint, but I'm really mentally not well, right? Or I'm
Mhm.
emotionally unstable, that I wouldn't consider myself like fully healthy. And so I think it's just more of having like a holistic viewpoint of the word healthy.
Yeah, I love that, and I just love hearing everybody's different,
Yeah.
viewpoints on it too, and it makes me think of different things,
Yeah.
as well, so thank you for that. And whenever I talk to other dietitians, I love hearing their why, like why you wanted to become an RD. I don't think I've ever met another dietitian who just kind of was like, I like food, I'll be a dietitian. There's usually like a much deeper connection there. Is that true for you? What is your why?
Yeah, it's actually a really cool story. I think it's a cool story. Some people think it's a cool story. I remember I wrote like one of my college admission essays on this actually. So my dad, I guess you would still say is a chef, like is not a practicing chef, but he did go to culinary school and that is what
Nice.
for a career for 6 or 7 years. And then, of course, cooked at home and, taught my brother and I how to cook, and that was just such a core memory of mine is, like, learning to cook from my dad, cooking in the kitchen with my dad, and so throughout my childhood and adolescence, I just loved cooking, and I was obsessed with Rachel Ray. Like, 30-minute meals was, like, my so I loved the Food Network. I loved cooking with my dad. And I remember like sometime in middle school, I had said to him, I think I want to be a chef or I think I should be a chef. And I will never forget my dad said over my dead body. Like, he was like, there is no way that's happening. He was only a practicing chef for, I think, maybe 7 years because the work life balance was just so hard and hours were hard raising kids and things like that. So he was like, absolutely not. He was like, you can take your passion for food and do something else with it, do a different career with that, or just make it like a hobby. So I essentially took my love for cooking and love for food and now that translates as, me as a dietitian, so
That's awesome. I love that, and so cool that you were, like, raised with an actual chef to teach you all of those things. I
yeah.
remember like in food science, just being so geeked out about all the different combinations and what's going on with food when we're cooking. Like I loved to cook, and I grew up with, my mom and my grandparents and everybody who are all like these great cooks, but I didn't know kind of the science behind it and the real how to put different flavor combinations together and stuff like that. So that must have been really cool to have as your foundation. I love it.
Yeah, I always joke that when we were younger, like a typical family dinner for us was like eating quail. And like my friends were eating like, walking tacos and, regular kind of like household stuff. But we were exposed to a very diverse palate at a very, very young age, which was cool. I think it
Yeah,
made me learn about food, made me learn about different cultures and appreciate food, appreciate like the eating experience. My dad like loves to dine out and like try new restaurants and stuff. So that was just like a huge part of our upbringing. So yeah, it's super
that's
every
awesome.
a dad who's a chef has its perks for sure for sure.
Yeah,
Holidays 10 out of
that elite.
10.
Love it. Love it. All right, cool. So tell us about your current role and, why you're so passionate about that particular population.
Yeah, so my current full-time role, I'm a dietitian at a local substance abuse treatment center. And part-time, I have my own private practice where I see primarily, patients who are struggling with disordered eating or eating disorders, but, also see other patients for kind of general nutrition, meal planning stuff, weight management, diabetes. But my passion and what I do is like my passion for mental health and my passion for mental health nutrition. And you know, even through my schooling and internship, mental health nutrition was not taught. It wasn't really talked about. I think my eating disorder rotation in my internship was maybe a week.
Mm.
You know, however many weeks we had in a year. So it was something that I kind of just fell into, right? Like I wasn't really exposed to it, but in my first job, I had covered the psychiatry unit, like the psych ward, and just really developed like a passion for that population. I think people are really aware of how nutrition impacts their physical health. I feel like, when we are exposed to nutrition education, typically in elementary school or middle school, it's how nutrition really impacts your physical health, right? Which is obviously important and true. Um, but I got so passionate about educating people on how intertwined their food choices are to their mental health and mental health presentations and behaviors. And just, so much of mental health is out of our control, right? There's so much of it that we can't necessarily control, but nutrition psychiatry is something that you do have control over, right? Like we can choose foods that support a really healthy gut microbiome, that support serotonin production, like all these things. And so, um, yeah, it's just like a kind of a niche area of nutrition that I've just grown to really love and appreciate.
That's amazing. I love that term, nutrition psychiatry
Yeah.
is really awesome. And I think that a lot of that we have so much in common because I work with a substance abuse center also. And it's honestly like such a joy every time when I
Mhm.
do those groups because um, people just don't know that connection. And it's so amazing to see them like enlightened by that information and everything. And I just love
Yeah.
that. Well, I always joke that I came out of the womb on a diet, right? Like I've lived my whole life on this struggle. And I know this is going to sound really, really terrible, but I can honestly remember being young and seeing like images or stories of women with anorexia and literally wishing to God to give me the discipline to have an eating disorder. And again, I know it's awful, but I would hear the stories about them saying like how hard it was for them to actually be able to eat food. And I would say stuff like, I wish I had that problem. And now, of course, as I've learned, like personally and professionally, the root problem is exactly the same or can be exactly the same. It's just how it gets coped with. And I've had to kind of like gently correct clients and patients over the years who dismiss their own relationship with food as being disordered or as having a diagnosable eating disorder because they happen to live in a larger body. And they think, well, if I'm in this larger body, I can't possibly have an eating disorder. And it's a really sad and common misunderstanding. Can you kind of talk to us about like the difference between disordered eating and an actual eating disorder and explain kind of what a person's body size or weight actually has to do with it?
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's this stereotype, right, of eating disorders that, to your point, is people in a thinner body type, right? People that restrict food intake. But, now we have so much of a better understanding of, just how much these patterns differ, right? We have more research, not a great amount of research, but we have more research than we did, 50 years ago. Um, the difference between disordered eating and eating disorders is eating disorders are a diagnosable mental health condition. They're all classified within something called the DSM-5, which is Diagnostic Statistic Manual. It's essentially just different psychiatric diagnoses, essentially. So there are really specific criteria for the different eating disorders. Um, and a lot of that is like behavior based. Some of it is weight based, but there's a lot of different criteria that you have to specifically meet to be diagnosed with an eating disorder. Whereas disordered eating is a much more broad, much more like nuanced term of just somebody who um, has a skewed viewpoint of food and how food impacts their body. And, working in this field, in the disordered eating disorder field for the past, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, I would probably say that 90% of the US population struggles with some kind of disordered eating pattern. Um, and I really encourage people, I think that the term eating disorders is, I think, for one, very scary for people. It's also very intimidating. It feels very serious. And so sometimes if someone's really ambivalent to the idea of it, they don't have a lot of insight into their eating disorder, disordered eating patterns. I'll intentionally use the term disordered eating because I do think it feels a little bit more approachable. People are more willing to talk about that. And so, whether we call it disordered eating, eating disorders, there's a lot of overlap there of certain food behaviors. But sometimes it doesn't meet that neat criteria for the eating disorder diagnoses. And I think the way that body fits into that, I mean, I could probably, spend an hour on this alone, but to simplify it, you can't look at someone and know that they have an eating disorder. And not only that, you can't look at someone who maybe has an eating disorder and know which eating disorder diagnoses they have, right? We can't differentiate just based off of body weight, shape, size. Um, in fact, like this is a fact I share with a lot of people, bulimia nervosa specifically, the majority of bulimia nervosa cases, those individuals are normal BMI or overweight BMI. Not that BMI is a great indicator of health, but it is what they're using to, this eating disorder diagnoses. And I think a lot of people think of uh, people that are struggling with anorexia nervosa as people being in a underweight body. But with atypical anorexia is, someone who is struggling with restrictive behavior and a drive for thinness, but they have a normal or overweight BMI classification, right? And I think again, that stereotype of anorexia nervosa is someone in an underweight body, and that's not necessarily the case, right? There's atypical anorexia, there's atypical bulimia, there's atypical binge eating disorder. So it's so much more than body size and weight and shape.
Yeah. I feel like most people think that mental and physical health are these like two separate entities that sometimes overlap. And I know this is going to sound so stupid and I'm totally aging myself right now, but if you have ever seen the Austin Powers movies, way back when, there's the the one Austin Powers movie that has the character whose name is Fat Bastard. I'm not calling him that, just to be clear. That's the character's actual name for anyone who's like too young to get that reference. But when he says something along the lines of, I can't stop eating, I eat because I'm unhappy, and I'm unhappy because I eat. Like, it's a ridiculous movie that's a comedy, but that part always made me and still makes me tear up because I can relate to it, first of all, because, these are my struggles as well. But mental and physical health are not two separate things that sometimes overlap. They're completely intertwined, always, like we were saying before. So, um, gut health is such a huge part of that and is so connected with our brains. And, I've talked about it with clients and on the podcast before, but you are super passionate about specifically gut health and that connection. And I love to, listen to you talk about it. So I'd love for you to share like specifically how our gut health in particular is interconnected with our brain and our mental health.
Yeah, yeah. I think you had said, but like I could spend on this topic alone probably like an hour. Thankfully there's so much research around this now, especially within the last decade or so. This really has been growing a lot in the nutrition space. But yeah, I mean, like Sam said, there's a direct connection between our brain and our intestines, right? Like through the vagus nerve, and so much of our immune cells, about 70 to 80% of our immune cells reside in our intestines and our gut microbiome. And then 90% of our serotonin and 50% of our dopamine is all created within the gut, right? So it makes sense that if our gut is really stressed, really inflamed, really imbalanced, that those things will also be off balance. And I think a lot of people think about maybe if they have like an unhealthy gut, right, that the inflammation is in your gut, right, because they have symptoms of bloating, diarrhea, constipation, that would maybe point to just a gastrointestinal issue. But the reality is, especially over a longer period of time and more chronic stress, chronic alcohol use, certainly, consuming really high amounts of high sugar foods, that inflammation actually like leaks into the bloodstream. It's also called like leaky gut, which I think some people are
Mhm.
familiar with that terminology. So that those inflammatory markers leak into your bloodstream, which obviously your bloodstream can reach all different organs, all different body systems, and can lead to something called systemic inflammation, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It's like inflammation of different body systems, right? So like your circulatory health, your reproductive health, your pulmonary health, like all of those things um, can become inflamed because of your poor diet, stress, alcohol use, etc. So it's not just localized to the gastrointestinal tract, which I do like to highlight for people. Like this affects our entire body. And that's really what I make the connection between brain, intestines, whole body is the connection that our gut microbiome has on not only our mental health but our every body system. So I think something too from more of like the mental emotional side of things, right? It's such a cyclic relationship where our emotions dictate our food choices a lot of the time, right? But then our food choices are also dictating our emotions. And so, there's specific emotions that are driving me to choose high salt, high fat, high sugar foods, right? Because we know that those are helpful for mood. We know that they boost dopamine. We know that they boost serotonin, right? And those foods are also negatively impacting my mental health, especially over a longer period of time. And so these things are just so connected. Like you don't have one without the other. And I think something a lot of people have heard of too is like the intestines or the gut microbiome is considered like the second brain.
Mhm.
It is so intricately connected to your hormones, to your neurotransmitters, to your immune cells, right? It's just so connected to everything else in the body.
Yeah, I actually talked on my last podcast episode about not even specifically what we eat, but how we eat and how kind of mindful eating can play into that. And, taking smaller bites, actually paying attention to what we're eating, tasting our food, chewing our food, and how all of that really can have not only a positive effect on our digestion itself and
Yeah.
our body's ability to metabolize our food and everything, but also on that emotional and mental connection as well. It's all like fascinating. I love to talk about it. So I have kind of like a longer two-part question. I'll give you the first
Okay.
part first. You were so generous with your time and came to share some of this information with my bariatric crew a couple months ago, which was so awesome. And you gave a lot of examples of like different tools that we can add to our toolbox in the, like health and weight loss space. And the hunger scales that you talked about were really helpful in determining how to know if we're actually physically hungry or specifically if it's a good time to eat something. Can you talk about those hunger scales, how we can use them, and how can someone really tell the difference between that physical hunger and I just want to eat something?
Yeah, yeah. I call that like head hunger versus stomach hunger. Like, how do I tell the difference between the two? Um, those hunger scales are so helpful for self assessment specifically. And that's kind of like how the terminology I use is, it just allows you to assess where you're at. Right. And I think what's really helpful about most of the hunger scales that are kind of out there, I know Harvard has a great one, MIT has a great one. They give descriptions for the number, right? It's not just scale of 1 to 10 and it's like what you think one is and two is. It's like descriptions. You can really identify how you're feeling and put words to it. And so, how I coach people to use those is to physically have the the hunger scale with them, like to print it out, to have it available maybe in different rooms in your house or at work or, wherever is like convenient, wherever you eat most of your meals, and physically have it in front of you and you assess your number before you eat. You assess your number halfway through your meal and then you assess your number afterwards. They kind of say like a great sweet spot is somewhere between 3 and 7. That, 1 and 2 is like I am ravenously hungry and I have
Mhm,
waited way too long to eat something. And above 7 can feel uncomfortable. 10 is like overly full to where you feel like physically sick, right? So like a Thanksgiving Day full level of,
mhm,
discomfort. And so, ideally we're saying between 3 and 7, but like we're human, you know what I mean? Like sometimes I go
mhm,
9, sometimes I'm at a 1, right? Like, but ideally, most of your meals and most of your days are somewhere between 3 and 7. And I think the big thing is really the pausing halfway through. It's like
mhm,
give body some time, like you said, to digest, right? To also engage in like mindful eating tactics, like taking your time with eating, minimizing distractions, using your five senses, just really experiencing your food, right? Like experiencing the smell of it, the taste of it, like the way that it looks, right? And having like a mindful eating experience, taking it slowly halfway through, kind of reassessing where you're at. And if halfway through you're still at like a 4, then great, like finish your meal, it's just a good kind of self assessment just to draw kind of some awareness to your body cues. Because I think so many of us are out of touch with our body cues. We can't recognize what hunger feels like. We can't recognize what fullness feels like, or we're uncomfortable with a fullness feeling. But fullness is like a normal bodily experience, right? And so just kind of putting some numbers and descriptions to those feelings, I think is really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's great because especially, working in obesity and weight management for so long and being a part of that population, myself, it's hard to, when you're so comfortable with uncomfortable being normal and feeling overly stuffed as your cue to stop versus like, okay, I'm just done. I'm not hungry anymore. I'm not overly full. I'm just satisfied and done. Like that's like a Narnia, that middle, I'm just done. Like we don't know sometimes that that even exists. We only
Yeah.
know hangry and oh my God, I gotta unbutton my pants. I'm so full. And so it's such a great way to teach that there is a happy medium there. And also, I always tell people, even after um, bariatric surgery, people expect that, okay, now I can eat X amount, so I'm always going to eat X amount. But that's just not how our appetite is. Some days we may eat every last lick and crumb of, whatever we put on the plate, and it's fine. And we feel like I could probably take a few more bites. And then other times you put this meal in front of you and halfway through, you might feel like you're done. So, whether you've had surgery or not, or on GLP-1s or not, like whatever the situation is, our appetite isn't always the same. We don't always eat the exact same amount of food is not always going to give us that like Narnia feeling of, being done and satisfied. So having that pause in the middle, I think is so crucial to actually be able to reassess and say like, wait, am I done? Or am I going to finish this? Or even maybe just eat a few more bites and see how I'm doing, and really give yourself time to assess where you're at and how you're feeling with it.
Yeah, yeah,
So I love
I
those.
just like, the struggle of it being like one or the other, very extreme of, either ravenously hungry
Mhm.
or overly stuffed and sick. And it's something that I see in the substance abuse world too, is this very like black and white
All
experience.
or nothing.
Yeah, very like all or nothing thinking, very black and white thinking and behaviors and patterns. And that's something that I encourage that population with a lot, is like what I always say, like, what's the gray, right? Like there is black and white, but like often what's most beneficial to you, your emotions, right, your life experience is like what the gray area is going to be. And it's the same thing with
Mhm.
and it's the same thing with intuitive eating. It's just like there is this middle space, and I think that makes it sound like it's easy to attain. I mean, it's hard. Like it's hard to,
Mhm.
that's why I said like sometimes you're going to be a 9, sometimes you're going to be a 1. Like it's not this like, okay, now that I have that, I'm going to be good forever. We're human. And like you said, our appetite fluctuates. And sometimes I'm not going to want to bust out the hunger scale because I don't feel like it. Right. So it's just like generally being, I think, just more, just bringing awareness to it.
Yes, absolutely. And then the other part to that was that I think, kind of piggybacks off this so beautifully is something you said at that meeting that, I actually like wrote down and really stuck with me, because you can, or and what I keep trying to remind myself is you can always go back to eating or go back to the food, is what you said. We were talking about like the different tools and different ways to try to divert our attention away from using food to cope. Like when we've established either by the hunger scales, or we just know darn well that we're not actually hungry because we just ate 5 minutes ago, and we're just anxious or bored or upset, tired, whatever it is. And as a population whose instinct is always to turn to the food in any uncomfortable situation, you encourage us to think of other ways that we can process that energy. Pick something like going for a short walk, going in the other room, working on a puzzle, whatever it is. And the key there was that instead of telling ourselves, I'm going to go do this thing because I can't eat XYZ, we should tell ourselves, I'm going to go do this thing, but I can always go back to the XYZ food if I want to. And it's such a subtle shift in mindset, but it can make a huge difference in how we handle that situation. So, can you kind of like expand on that a little? Why do so many people crave those um, highly palatable, hyper palatable, sugary processed foods when we're stressed and anxious and feel like that's something that we have to have? Give us some examples of the things that we can do to try to take the focus off food when we're feeling some type of way.
Yeah, I think, you had said like, what is it about those foods that, makes us so drawn to them when we're having those like experiences of feeling emotional or wanting to comfort or self-soothe, or we're sad or we're lonely or we're happy or, whatever. It's because those foods work, right? It's because it's because those foods, high salt, high fat, high sugar, have a really profound effect on the brain and like lighting up reward pathways and dopamine pathways within the brain. Sugar specifically in a lot of research studies is comparable, if not more addictive than cocaine. especially processed sugar, right? So we know that they work, like they light up the brain, they make us feel better. What I like to highlight for people is that yes, it works and it works in the short term, right? People are back to feeling XYZ emotion. I eat the thing, I feel better. An hour later, 30 minutes later, I'm back to feeling lonely. I'm back to feeling X. I'm back to feeling bored, right? It works for a short period of time. It does not work for a long period of time. And, I call it my tool belt theory, which is what you're
Mm.
referencing, right? So, like, if we are emotionally dysregulated or we're kind of looking for something to self soothe, like, okay, we bust out the tool belt. What is in our tool belt? Some people have nothing other than, eating, right? Like using food for comfort, sometimes substance use, right? Like sometimes people haven't built up their tool belt to have like adaptive coping skills, right? Those are coping skills, but they're more like maladaptive coping skills. And so I think saying, hey, what can we find? What activities, what skills can we find to fill up this tool belt? Like you had mentioned a couple, doing puzzles or word crosses. I think another one I like to encourage people with is like hot and cold therapy, which I think is a DBT skill, CBT skill. It's like a
Mm.
hot shower or cold shower, like running your hands under hot or really cold water, can be really helpful in just like emotional regulation, being outside, being in sunlight, going for a walk,
Mhm.
calling a sponsor, calling a friend, you know, trying something first. Sometimes I'll tell people to try 3 or 4 things, right? Maybe you go for a 10-minute walk, you call a friend, you take a hot shower, and then if you still have the urge to binge or you still have the urge to restrict or whatever the behavior is, then you can use it, right? And I think it's a harm reduction tactic is really kind of what it is.
Mhm.
It is not going to be helpful and sustainable for me to tell someone that's really struggling with an eating disorder behavior, hey, moving forward, don't ever do it again, right? Like, like if someone's struggling with overeating and binge eating, like, hey, you probably shouldn't do that. Like, good luck, try these other things out. It builds this like shame cycle, is what it does, because that's not realistic, right? If someone's been using this coping
Mhm.
skill, certainly in my experience for decades, right? People have been utilizing food for comfort for decades. Being like, okay, you can't use that anymore is just like not realistic. So I usually have more of a harm reduction approach of like, let's try these other things first. And if they don't work, you still know that eating is an option, like food is an option rather than taking it away, taking it out of the tool belt and putting it over here, right? It kind of gives this thing a lot of power, right?
Mm.
It's like the red button theory in psychology of like if you tell somebody like not to press the red button, like you're gonna want to press the red button. It's like when you take something away from someone, it really it makes it hold a lot of power versus just saying like, this is okay, they're all available to you. Maybe we start with some adaptive coping skills and it just trains your brain to say like, hey, we're actually gonna change this neural pathway, right? Because that's what happens is your brain just for decades digs this neural pathway of I feel X emotion, I immediately eat to feel better, right? And
Mhm.
when you have decades of your brain learning that behavior, it is so hard to break it, but the only way you can break it is just start digging a different pathway. Maybe once a day instead of doing, the overeating, binge eating or restrictive episode, you decide to do something else. And it just slowly teaches your brain that it doesn't have to be like this, right? When I have this emotion or this experience, I don't have to choose an eating behavior or an overexercising behavior to cope with it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That was gold. Thank you. Now I wanted to kind of talk about another way that our mental and physical health are connected, and that's how we see our bodies. And in 11 plus years of practicing as a dietitian, being in weight management, I don't think I've ever met a single human, male or female, that doesn't have some kind of insecurities about their body. And I don't personally know any models or celebrities, but I'm not one, I guess. Um, but we've seen it so often and, heard plenty of stories from them over the years about their own overwhelming insecurities, even though we see them as like, this ideal that we would want to look like. And unfortunately, in the world of weight loss, I was just talking to my therapist about this earlier today, which is kind of funny. Like in the world of weight loss, we think, oh, I'm going to lose, X amount of pounds. And then all that insecurity is just going to go away and life's going to be great. And I'm going to feel great because I'm going to be perfect and I'm going to look perfect. And I'm going to feel perfect. But that's just not true. And if we aren't at peace within, there's always going to be something. And I heard you talking about something that I kind of figured out the hard way over the years and then started encouraging my clients to do as well. And I'd love for you to get into it here. That's gratitude. Showing gratitude for the parts of our bodies that we beat ourselves up over. So I don't want to give too much away. I want you to take it away on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you had kind of explained is something that I call like the moving target theory that I literally had a client say one time, like, if I have 99 problems, losing weight is going to fix all of them. Right. Like, it is that mentality that, we hold so much of our self worth and self value in the way that we look and in our weight. Right. And so it makes sense why we would believe it would solve all of our problems because it is our whole world, right? Like we're putting so many eggs in that self-value, self-worth basket that are related to our image rather than other things, which is kind of where the body neutrality stuff comes in. So that's kind of the terminology around the body gratitude is body neutrality. So, a lot of my clients, and it sounds like, a lot of clients you've worked with are on this body negative side and body positive side is on the other end. And it is sometimes really difficult for people to go from body negative to body positive, right? I think a lot of the time feels very inauthentic to people. For people that it feels authentic, body positivity is great and super helpful, but for some people, it's not. When they just don't want to accept the current body that they're in, let alone like or love the body that they're in, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so, body neutrality, kind of the idea is that it takes the focus completely away from the way that your body looks. So, body negative is about the way that you look and your weight, and body positive is about the way that you look and your weight, right? Body neutrality is about the function of your body, what your
Mm.
body does for you, how your body shows up for you. And typically, some like reframing exercises are super helpful. So, if someone says, my legs are so fat, right? I would say, let's like reframe that to a body neutral statement, right? So, not, I love the way my legs look. The body neutral statement is, my legs give me the ability to walk and run, right? Or I think one that I use in the substance abuse addiction space is like, my body kept me alive through active addiction, right? My body kept me
Mm.
an active eating disorder. My body is resilient. My arms give me the ability to hug the people that I love. So I think just finding what neutral reframes feel most helpful and most authentic and just like sticking with those. And I tell people to write them out every single day, like list 3 or 4 body gratitude, body neutral statements every single day. Because at the very least, your body woke you up that day, right? And
Mm.
your heart's pumping and you're alive, right? And so just really shifting the focus away from the way that you look and focusing more on the functionality of your body and accepting and respect. I think respect is a big word, just respecting the body,
Mhm.
right? We don't have to love the body that we're in, but we should respect it, right? It deserves respect, which means fueling it, right? Like fueling it consistently and not speaking so negatively about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a huge thing that we get wrong in the weight loss world is,
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
kind of look at like, um, if we want to lose weight, we must hate our bodies. And
Mhm.
once we lose the weight, we're going to love our bodies. But it's the complete opposite. Like, we have to love our bodies to respect it enough to do the things that are going to make it function well, that eventually will probably lead to the weight loss that we're seeking. But that's kind of just like the happy byproduct. The real work is just laying the foundation of that healthier lifestyle and actually feeling at peace enough and, mentally and emotionally stable enough to really put that work in and respect our bodies enough to function in that way for us. And, unfortunately, like, we look at a lot of people, I mean, at least when I grew up, the diet culture was like, we looked at exercise as torture, and you had to like cut all these things out and all these crazy diets and stuff. And it's all about, restriction and exercising and torture basically to get to this place. And then, that's why people spiral afterwards, because we get to that place, or maybe we never get there because we give up along the way, but it's just so unrealistic and not sustainable. And then we're
Yeah.
like, well, my life didn't become perfect now that I lost this
Right. Right.
20 pounds.
I still have
Imagine
a lot of
that.
other yeah, I have a lot of other issues that are maybe related to my body still or not, right? But it
Mhm.
doesn't solve everything. And I think the moving target theory is like, okay, even if I lose the weight, if I don't address that underlying insecurity, it comes out in something else, right? Now I hate my eyebrows. Now I hate my sagging
Mhm.
skin marks. Now I hate that. Like, even if it's unrelated to weight, there is a lot of research that shows it's like this moving target. Even if I do lose the weight, now the insecurity is placed on to something else, right?
Absolutely.
So it's really to your just about addressing that underlying behavior. And I also think just like again, I'm all about awareness, like bringing awareness
Mhm.
your thoughts on your body, right? I tell my clients all the time that that are in a really body negative space or have core beliefs about certain body types, right? And I'll ask them like, where did you learn that? And they'll say like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, we weren't born with that thought. Like, you weren't born with that thought. So like, where did you learn that? Right. And the unfortunate reality is like everywhere, right? It's like media, books, movies, social media. I mean, just like messaging from people, right? Like, we are consuming so much information about food and body and we don't even know it, right? Like, to your point,
Mhm.
came out the womb on a diet. I remember my era was like the Victoria's Secret fashion show. And I remember, I don't know, middle schooler looking at that and being like, okay, so those body types are glorified, right? Like, that's what's considered ideal and beautiful. My body doesn't look like that. So the indirect message is like, my body is gross, right? Like, my body's not okay. My body doesn't look like that. And it's just, we have consumed so much of that information over the course of years, decades sometimes, that it takes a lot of work to like filter through those like core beliefs that we have about body and recognize that like most of that came from something or someone else. Like, whether it's a viewpoint about larger bodies, a viewpoint about smaller bodies, like, what is your actual thought about body and weight, and trying to really decipher from like what's just been like, I feel like pounded, into our brain from
Mhm.
20 million directions since we literally came out the womb, even like
Mhm.
and advertising. I mean, it's everywhere. So I always just tell people, let's like bring awareness to that. Like, what are your actual thoughts on body and like where did it come from? And I think somewhere a lot of people go sometimes is like, well, they equate healthy to a specific body size. And this goes back to like, that first
Mhm.
question, like, what do we do? That's something I do a lot with clients is like, okay, you just said the word healthy. So what does that actually mean? And then when they actually describe it, it has nothing to do with body type or weight or shape or size, right? So I think this multi-billion dollar industry of diet culture truly has warped our brain to believe certain things about ourselves and others and food. And it just takes work to kind of break those beliefs down and break some of those thoughts down. And it's possible, like it's possible to truly live in a space where your relationship with food is neutral and your relationship with your body is neutral. It doesn't necessarily have to be awesome and great, but it definitely does not have to be negative.
Yeah, 100%. Even just personally, it's like I'm 45 years old and I'm just now
Yeah.
learning all of the connections, and like what the narrative that I've been telling myself about my body over the years and trying to figure out where that came from and really doing the work to get to that place. Because if we don't, it's always going to be there and nothing's ever going to be enough. Thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
And, to kind of piggyback off of that, I think that so much of this population either has or continues to ping pong between the restrictive eating and then off the rails, like that all or nothing
Yeah.
um, mentality that we were talking about. It carries into our intake and how we're eating also. So, how does restrictive eating specifically, because that's typically one of the things that most people, if they think like, oh, I have to lose weight or they're unhappy about their body size, like immediately it's like, well, I can't eat anything. So, specifically restrictive eating over time, how does that affect the gut microbiome? And
Mhm.
then, how can we repair that? Or do we need the supplements? Do we need probiotics, prebiotics, or can we actually support our gut through food?
Yeah. Yeah. Restrictive eating patterns, restrictive dieting has a really profound effect on our gastrointestinal system. It causes something called dysbiosis, which is essentially just a really bad disruption in kind of your gut microbiome environment, which is made up of bacteria and fungi and all these kinds of things, but it really disrupts the bacteria component and increases the amount of like harmful bacteria, decreases the amount of beneficial good bacteria, which is what typically leads to a lot of symptoms of constipation, diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain, all of that kind of in that umbrella of symptoms. It also affects like your motility, with, something called peristalsis, which is just kind of like the way that your muscles and your GI tract move food throughout your body, right? It impacts motility. It slows motility down because I mean, if you have to imagine if you're not really eating much of anything, the motility is going to naturally slow down because your
Hmm.
metabolism is slowing down, right? Your body is kind of entering this like fight or flight stage. And so that motility typically causes constipation. It can sometimes cause gastroparesis, which is just like a severe, slowing in your stomach and small intestine. So it has a really profound effect on your gastrointestinal tract, especially if it's for a really prolonged, chronic period of time. Um, it can be restored, in most situations, in most cases, and I typically recommend trying to get nutrients and probiotics and prebiotics, like all these things that are really great for our gut through food rather than through supplementation. I think in the beginning if it's difficult in general to eat, sometimes supplements can be helpful, right? If we're just like generally kind of getting back into incorporating more food. But, our body is going to absorb nutrients better through food than it will through supplements. So, like incorporating probiotic foods, which would be, I think yogurt is like the easiest one for people, but sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, all of that good stuff and then incorporating prebiotic foods, which are a specific type of fiber that the probiotics feed on to then like multiply in the gut to increase the good bacteria. So like common prebiotic foods would be like asparagus, onions, garlic, apples, oats. Those are kind of like some main bananas are main prebiotic foods. And then water, like fluid. Like water is so important. Hydration is so important for that balance in the gut microbiome. So that would be kind of like the three things I think I would like recommend when trying to restore motility, just your gut microbiome environment in general would be probiotics, prebiotics, and fluid.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned fluid too, because I think right now there's this whole like maxing trend. First, it was protein maxing, which people are so
Yes.
protein maxing, but now we're on
So
fiber maxing.
yeah.
And, I have to like tell clients all the time, yes, I want you to incorporate more fiber, but you cannot eat all the fiber at one time and expect that your body is going to respond well. Also, if you're struggling to get enough fluids in, then we have to be very careful about the amount of fiber that we are increasing. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because it's such an important piece to that, that I think sometimes we hear these things on social media, which is gonna lead me right into my next question, but, you know, like, you see these bits and pieces, and people, like the general public, is just like, "Oh, we need more fiber, so let's eat more of these. I need more probiotics." She said that probiotic foods are, XYZ, and prebiotic foods are these, so let's get them all in here and, go kind
Yeah.
of that all or nothing thing, and then they're like, "Okay, well, now I feel even worse, so we're not gonna do that again."
Well, and
Eh
you have to have the fluid for the fiber to work effectively, right? Like what the fiber does, especially like the particular type of fiber, soluble fiber, it draws water into your intestines, right? Like it's what like the fiber bulks up your stool and it needs the
Mhm.
fluid. It needs the fluid to do that. And so whenever I encourage patients to either take a fiber supplement or increase their fiber amount, I also tell them that they have to up their water intake. If they're drinking 60 ounces, I tell them to drink 80 ounces. You have those have to
Mhm.
they have to go hand in hand, or like you said, the people are gonna be very uncomfortable. Yeah.
Very uncomfortable,
Not
yes.
happy. Yeah, for
It
sure.
has the opposite effect of what we wanted,
Literally, yeah.
for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. So, like I said, that leads me right into my next question. There's this whole kind of like wellness culture, and I don't want to throw the word wellness under the bus either, because I do
Yeah.
consider myself like in private practice to be part of that. And, I like you were talking about holistic, like all of that is wonderful.
Mhm.
But I feel like social media is just flooded with information on, nutrition and nutrition adjacent topics. So, people are always talking about supplements, the medications. We got peptides all over the place now.
Oh, yeah.
Like, all of this stuff. And some of it is great information, but some of it I believe to be like really harmful, especially because you can't give individualized information on social media. So people don't know how to kind of decipher their own situation and adapt it to their own lifestyle. So what are, like one or two things that are kind of like circulating around the interwebs at the moment that you feel is like good and good info, and maybe one or two things that is making you like want to cringe and throw your phone against the wall?
Oh, it's just like triggered so much. I would say I would say that something I've seen on social media that was like absolutely infuriating. Like I was talking about this for like 3 days. You probably saw it. It was I'm not even gonna name the influencer, it was an influencer, famous person, talking about how we shouldn't add bananas and
Oh, yes.
I
Yes.
mean, talking about how you shouldn't add bananas and berries together in a smoothie because the banana has a chemical in it that breaks down antioxidants and polyphenols in the berries and all this kind of stuff. Saying like, don't put
Mhm.
bananas. smoothie. I mean, it was the craziest thing I think I've seen in the, like, nutrition misinformation space in, like, a while. And by the I looked into it, there's, like, literally zero research, zero evidence around it. Like, what?
Yeah. I do have to say though, and like not to interrupt, but
Yeah.
I will say that was probably one example where I was highly impressed by the backlash that she got
Yes.
because there was
Same.
a lot of pushback on that. I think
Yeah,
she,
yeah,
you
she
know,
quieted it down. She
yeah.
quieted it it's probably one of the craziest things I've seen in a while.
Hmm.
I have personally filled my social media and media with, like, body neutral influencers. So I do see a lot of really positive things on my social media, but I have, like, crafted it to be like that. And
Hmm.
I clients, like, you can change your like, you can change your algorithm. You can unfollow anyone that's providing harmful or unnecessary or untrue, unfactual nutrition and fitness information. So, like, I personally follow a lot of influencers that are body neutral. And so I love to see that. Like, it's like the most encouraging thing ever, just seeing even how other dietitians in the same space that I'm in, providing eating disorder, disordered eating care, like how they word certain things. I just constantly learn so much from other people. So yeah, I would say the positive has been some of the body neutral stuff that I've seen online.
Well, how can we find those people? Tell us
uh,
your algorithm secrets, Yoda.
yeah, right. Find Food Freedom is a really, really great podcast. Her name is Sam. She's kind of the dietitian
I like
behind.
her already.
Yeah. I love her content. I want to say Victoria Brown. She was like a D1 athlete and struggled with a lot of like body image stuff, and she's a very body neutral influencer. Honestly, like, just Googling, like, I mean, AI is great and harmful, but I think that it's really beneficial for this specifically. Like, I want to target my social media to be body neutral, to be, about incorporating all foods and the all foods fit, like using some of that terminology and just researching into what influencers kind of fall in that space.
That's great. I've never
Yeah.
even thought about using AI for that. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
I
That's
love
kind of how
that.
I like started with it. It was just like, hey, like, what are some other, like, not only dietitians, but just like influencers, right? Like, people that have such a following, right? And like, are they doing it in a way that's like promoting, the things that we talked about here tonight, like just body neutral things, like all foods fit, and how many people look up to those people is obviously influential, right? Like, I only have like 100 followers on my Instagram account. So it's like
Mhm.
those people have such a broader net to be able to cast to. And I think that those two people that I listed do like a really, really great job. And just the way that they word things is just, yeah, just really helpful even for me. So
I love that. Thanks for the
yeah.
tip. I'm going to do
Yeah.
that. All right. So I have a kind of a fun question to close out that I'm really
Okay.
interested in hearing the answers to. But
Okay.
as we said in the intro, you are married to another dietitian. Do you guys ever have like differing views on the hot nutrition topics? And what does your fridge look like inside?
Yeah. My husband was traditionally in mostly weight management and diabetes care. Um, and he also worked at a VA. And, I think my husband's approach to nutrition counseling is generally different. I come from a lens of mental health, disordered eating, eating disorders. It's much more like emotionally charged, whereas, I think he can be a little bit more direct in like the weight management, diabetes counseling, and especially the patient populations he's worked with, I think appreciate a little bit more like direct nutrition.
Mhm.
Um, so Yeah, I would say when or if we do have like differing views on things, it's because I'm looking at it through like an emotional lens, being like, well, they could have like maybe worded that differently, maybe it's not from, like the data standpoint, like, but it's true and factual, So I think sometimes it's actually really helpful to hear his perspective because sometimes I get really like in my zone of mental health and, just how to approach that patient population. And I think sometimes it's just kind of helpful to be like, no, but this is factual. So I think it's helpful more often than not. But I would say my thoughts and approach are typically a lot more emotional. That's usually like the bigger difference. Digging into emotions and obviously like the nutrition psychiatry component where he works a lot with kind of like numbers, with diabetes.
More clinical.
Yeah, just like a little bit more clinical.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. What's in your fridge?
I feel like it's such a standard fridge. I'm trying to think like we we make our own kefir, which always like
Really?
really freaks people out because when you make your own kefir, and I'm telling you, it is so much better than store bought if you haven't made it before. But you buy kefir grains. We bought kefir grains off of like the internet. They were like mailed to us. And then you pour milk into it and you leave it on your counter, like out for like 2 or 3 days. And the kefir grains are essentially like it's it's what feeds on the sugar to ferment it. It's about how it becomes
Yeah.
whatever. Then you put it in the
Fascinating.
fridge when it's done on the counter. But anyways, but even on the counter, people will be like, "You have just a giant jar of milk sitting on your counter. It's supposed to be there." And it's like curdling and people are like, "What is So we have a whole
I love this.
that is probably like the weirdest thing in there. Um yeah.
That's definitely the hallmark of a double dietitian kitchen. Most
Is kefir.
definitely.
Is homemade kefir for sure.
Homemade kefir. I love it.
It's
That's
great.
so
I
funny.
swear. It's so good.
Well, you'll have to share with us the
I
type
love
of kefir seeds that you bought.
Yeah. Yeah,
What are they called?
the grains, the kefir grains, yeah.
And we can all try to make our own so that we're
Your own.
getting the good fiber that we need, the probiotics that we need. Yes. I love that. Oh my gosh. All right, my friend. Thank you so much for doing this and taking the time. Tell us where we can follow you.
Yeah. So Instagram is at Berry Well Nutrition. So Berry Well Nutrition. And then I also have a website that has kind of like an about me section, a recipes section. And that is www.berrywellnutrition.com. That's pretty much it. So
Perfect. And I'll have those linked in the show notes as well so everybody can go and find you. Thank you so much.
thank you. It's been so fun.
Didn't I tell you you guys would love her? She is just awesome. And I learned a lot from her. I always love listening to how passionate she is about eating disorders and the gut brain connection, all of that. So I hope that you guys really loved this conversation. All of her information will be linked in the show notes, as well as 2 of those hunger scales that we talked about in the episode. And I hope that you noticed how closely last week's episode kind of coordinated with this interview. If you'd missed last week's episode, that's episode 52, where we talk about it's not only what we eat, it's how we eat. I strongly encourage you to go back and listen to that because you'll see how it's all connected there. And I really just loved this conversation. I hope you loved it as well. Thank you for taking the time. If you know somebody that could benefit from this information, I would love for you to share this episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe and to leave a review. That is how our show gets put out to more people who will benefit from it. Thank you so much, guys. I love you. God loves you. Have a great week.